All right, we are live and back at it. It has been a minute because we rescheduled a bit, but we are finally talking about combat homebrew. I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this topic. Let's do, our quick traditional go around the table, say something random. I'm Ash, I'm saying something random. Go.
Well, I'm Scout. Hi. Yes.
I'm Soph. I finally have doorknob.
That's true.
You said something, say something random, so I did it.
Yeah, that's completely true.
I think Mega's still getting water.
Okay, Chrissy.
I have to think of anything random. I'm Chrissy. I like talking about combat because I don't like combat.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Amazing.
I'm Color, and I went to the gym today.
Oh,
Yeah!
good shit.
Yay!
Ooh, get stonks.
Stonks time.
Gotta,
Hell yeah.
follow the path of your D&D character, Cordelia Stonks.
That's the dream. I am very much in pain right now.
No pain, no gain.
Alright, and then Meg is here, but she'll be joining us shortly, as well as Nora might be popping in later. But for now, let's talk combat homebrew. I named this episode The Essence of War, based off a Sun Tzu quote, which I'm a fan of Sun Tzu. I've been reading some Sun Tzu as well as some books. I've been using Sun Tzu lately, The Poppy War, and I really like this phrase, the essence of war, because in his quote, it's quickness that's the essence of war. And for me, that kind of is how I like to think of combat in D&D. I want to make sure it's a quick experience. One of the reasons I first started homebrewing for combat was just because combat was slogging on or too slow. But just in general, you wanted an experience that flows. And so, the flow of combat is what I kind of think of for the essence of D&D. To start us kind of off, I want to know what's the favorite thing about combat for different people. I know some people may not actually like combat. Hey, Chrissy. But
Hello.
if there's anything you do like, I do wish to know about it. Let's start with Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Scout, go.
Oh, okay. This felt targeted. Combat is for D&D just reminds me a lot like video games, which I guess is the main reason why I enjoy it personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like coming from a background of, I guess, being a gamer and playing like RPGs or turn-based stuff, it's combat. D&D combat's just like a natural flow. So for me personally, it just feels a lot. It was a lot easier to pick up than like role play, let's say.
It's a comfortable aspect you're used to, right? Versus the roleplay output, the narrative aspect.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like that.
I would say also in the kind of like good side of combat is I generally find that combat is where like you get to use your character, like kind of all of their abilities and stuff more. Like a lot of abilities and things are focused on combat. So when you're in it, like it feels like, oh, this is what I spec my character for, this is what we're doing well. So I kind of feel like, at least for me, I kind of want at least one small or larger combat for every session I play, just because you get to kind of explore your character more thoroughly instead of just role-playing, which seems kind of a little bit more like reduced in terms of what you're able to do and accomplish.
No, that's completely true, right? D&D as a rule set is for like almost seeing combat. It's a combat rule set in terms of, okay, what is your combat style? That's what a class is. What is the type of combat style your character invokes? And so most of your abilities is tied to that. And so it feels good to press your buttons, which means you have to be in combat to get use out of it.
Yeah, to add on to that, it's like I think combat also gives us the opportunity to like roleplay, like you said, push our buttons. Like, how far would your character go for this? What who do they choose to attack first, how they choose to attack them can say a lot about them. Not just, role playing as in talking, but also their actions, They choose to move over here to save this person over fighting them first or something like that, right? It's like sacrificing this or that in that situation where everything could be at risk. That type of deal.
Yeah.
I got
Yeah, I think.
go for
Oh,
it.
sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
go.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that's why I like combat. Not because it's like I don't like It's not that I like combat because it's like video game type combat, but the ability for me to, or like for anybody in general to expand upon like what they can do, not just fight or slash or do something, but like interact and expand on that character depth is, I think that's kind of why I like combat. Within that heat of action, there's a lot that could spawn from it.
Yeah, I think I actually agree, and I was going to use this for what's my favorite thing about combat is I love creating builds of characters as well, but one of my favorite things is using it as a roleplay opportunity. Like one of my favorite things is combat is a very simple like choice, right? You have choice. Okay, what do I do this turn? And when you roleplay normally in a scene, right, you have a billion things you could technically do or say, but in combat, you have like, okay, I could do this or that or this. What does each thing say about my character? It's a lot more simpler way to roleplay, but it has still that depth that we can explore the character with.
Yeah, I certainly agree with the role playing aspect of it. I am, contrary to a lot of people, I love role playing, but I feel like with combat, for me, it's sometimes hard to keep track of everything that I am able or capable to do as my character. So I need to be like very organized and meticulous with it. But once I start to get the hang of it, and you notice the difference from like learning what your character can do, and also like starting to experiment with role playing, I think that's like the peak moments for of combat for me. And also, going back to the fact that I do like roleplay, I do love a good end of the combat moment. It might be
Yeah.
like an iconic how do you want to do this
Yeah.
moment.
Or an iconic natural 20 strength check.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I wonder who had that.
I wonder.
I wonder.
Yeah.
Mm.
But yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of things about combat that we can like, even if sometimes it can be like little things that can be tweaked and whatnot, and that's what we're here to discuss. And so to transition to that, I want to know maybe something people don't like about combat, and then go through maybe that and talk about like how each of us tried to fix it, either as players, as characters, as DMs. Does anyone have anything they're like, okay, yeah, this didn't actually feel good, or this wasn't to my expectation?
I like
Oh, good.
for me it's when it comes to like spellcasters, I feel like there's like different possibilities that you can choose from what's going on in the situation. But sometimes with more martial based characters, it could be a little bit difficult to, innovate for every round that you have to like fight.
Yeah.
And I think it's not my least favorite because I do think that there's like things that you can do to make a different thing every time. But I guess when you're adapting to a new character, that could be a little challenging for me.
Well, I think that's a great prompt, right? Innovating martial characters so they feel more like they have more than, or on equal points to spellcasters who
Punch.
can do so many
Yeah.
different things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, spellcasters and martial characters, I feel like the divide is much bigger than I was expecting when I like first tried out D&D. Where spellcasting, I almost find it a little too overwhelming, where there's so many options, but then you don't have enough spell slots and you're not sure how to manage it, and you don't know if this like idea is gonna work out, if it's just a damage spell or if it's like some other spell. And then as a martial character, like, you do the same thing every turn. You move in close to melee range, and then you stay there the whole fight, and you just attack, like, the same attack every turn. And that's the only real reason why I don't like combat, is I really don't like how the attack action tends to be the same thing every turn for your character. At least for certain characters. I think for most of them it kind of ends up being that way. But you move, you take the same attack action you always do, and then maybe you have a bonus action, and then you just rinse and repeat, and that's what I don't like about combat.
So there's a good prompt that anyone can answer, right? How do we make martial characters more dynamic, right? Because I do think there are certain ways to do that. I'll mention real quick. Liam O'Brien is a great example of a player who makes it dynamic himself by describing things in a very cool way. And so players have the possibility of describing actions or whatnot, but of course, there's only so much work you can do, and maybe not everyone's comfortable with that. So how, maybe, in homebrew terms, does anyone have an idea how to make combat for martial characters more dynamic?
This is something that I've been just thinking for a while, because I've been super into this game called For the King, and a lot of the martial characters, like, depending on like what kind of weapon they get, they have like different abilities associated with it. So like you can like smack somebody with like a trident, but like you can also like try to smack them harder with the trident, or like cause them to bleed, or make them like wet or something, or like give them like particular like special effects or other. And me being super fascinated with that, I was thinking maybe that can be incorporated into particularly like martial characters, where like you can have a basic attack, but you can also have the special attack type option that has a penalty, that may have an accuracy penalty, but would do either more damage or implement a special effect or whatever. So you'd at least have some sort of choice.
Yeah, I feel like monks are set up in a similar way, where like they have their basic attack, but then they have those like key point systems that can let them add like extra damage, or they can add some sort of like stun or something like that on top of it, and then that gives you more options and stuff like that. And if you can find like feats or other like homebrew stuff that let you do something similar with other martial styles, like a fighter or something, then that can be really interesting.
Yeah, I've thought about this myself, and one of the things that I think martial characters were lacking, right, is choice. The fact is, right, usually they just make an attack, and that's the best thing they can do, right? And so having other options at their disposal makes their gameplay a bit more interesting. They can be like, okay, maybe I can do this instead of that, or if I do this in this certain way, it gives me player agency and choice to take that. I have been working on like weapons and equipment and stuff on the side that at some point I would love your guys' take, but too long for this. But in general, one thing I was considering is, just something basic, let's say damage type, right? As damage types stand, right, it doesn't really matter as much in normal combat. And a weapon does one damage type, boom, you move on. One of my ideas to go off that was, okay, what if we have a weapon can do two different damage types, and each damage type is slightly different because it's a different condition, or it does different, it gives you a different option to do it, right? That's one example of just unlocking a little bit choice for the character. I think that, at least for me, is like the essence of like making combat more dynamic. You want to have more choice instead of just, okay, I attack, I do this much damage, enter.
Yeah, I like the idea of also then you can have more resiliences and like more weaknesses and stuff in your monsters, and it can become more like a bit of a puzzle. Like even the way that you run combat now, which has a lot of like homebrew stuff attached to it, it's kind of changed into like the first third of the fight, you don't know what to expect and you're trying to get information, and then like the middle third, you're developing the strategy around the information you have, and then like the end third, you're like implementing that, and it goes like pretty quickly. where now that you know how to beat them, you can actually counter them. Like, that just makes the whole entire fight so much more interesting if you can break it down to, like, first we have to find their weaknesses, and then we can exploit them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great transition to start talking about some of the stuff we have implemented in terms of resilience. Chrissy, I would love to talk about that, as well as the information part of combat, which I've used and you've used, martial checks. So let's see. Let's start with martial checks first, because information, for me, it's a huge thing. I love when information changes in a battlefield. You feel like you're learning, and you feel like the battle itself is like changing as you go. To have some context for, the recording, martial checks is a system where you have a free check once per turn you can make, and if you pass a certain DC, you can learn a creature's abilities, or you can learn a bit more about the creature in terms of stats, or just information in general. How do people feel about that?
I think everyone here has played with your martial checks before, right?
Yes, at least once.
In general, even just at that point, I already really like the improvement, because one, it gives another thing to do on your turn. So especially if you don't have any bonus actions and you're already positioned well, if you just take one attack and your turn ends, it's kind of a little disappointing. So you already have an extra thing you can do. So even if your attack misses, you might roll a good martial check and you might figure out that the monster is weak to something. Or you might figure out like its general HP, or you can use something like that. And then on top of that, Ash has a lot of other things. But even just having an extra action with an extra ability to learn about the monster you're fighting, I think already gives you just a lot more interest in that particular encounter.
What do the rest of you think? I can talk about martial checks for days, but I would love to hear more because you guys have all at least experienced it once now.
Personally, I love martial checks. Like, I wanted to talk about homebrew combat just to talk about martial checks.
Yeah.
I think they definitely make the game much more dynamic, because I think like there's just like a general consensus that like vanilla D&D combat can get boring, especially as a martial character. But martial checks add like this level of like, you can learn new things about the enemy to like figure out their weaknesses, and then you added the exploit system where we can like not just learn what they do but also like weaken their attacks, which I think is like,
Yeah, that was really cool.
yeah, like it can, the martial checks themselves can feel a little gimmicky, because it's like, how do we suddenly know, like in character, how do we know that this character is going to do this attack when we haven't seen it before? But I think the cost, like the benefit of how interesting martial checks make combat outweigh the I guess the gimmicky nature of the martial checks themselves.
Hmm.
It's a good point, yeah. I actually didn't even think about that.
I think about it every time.
I was like, oh, this is how a video game works. This is how knowledge works. Yep.
Yeah, I've had other DMs that have done like an other explanation for it, because I know a DM that I play with where it also incorporates martial checks, and the way he does it, it's like he is like a sort of sci-fi sort of world, and so he literally has like a combat sort of like screen come up for our like we have a Warforged in a party, and so he made it so narratively he's giving us the information because it's uploaded via his like computer analysis. And
That's pretty cool.
Like I try to do this sometimes, but I honestly do forget. In my head, the way you guys figure it out is martial checks for me is based on insight checks, right? And so it's reading the subtle gestures in a character's movement or like thinking, and so you don't get the mechanical, like your characters don't know mechanically this does 1d6 fire damage, right? But you get the sense, okay, looks like he's ready to slam his hand into the ground and do like an AoE fire damage ability. It's kind of how I think about it in terms of like, oh, this is what your characters translate into.
I think if you want to make it like, go ahead.
No, you.
No. Well, just saying, like, if you want to make it super realistic, like, you can stagger it slightly. Like, oh, if you make the check the next time they use the ability you want to know, like, then you just get the info. Like, you could do slight changes to, like, stagger it or, like, give it in a way that seems more realistic, but I think it's doable.
Mhm.
What are
I
you gonna
was
say,
I
Claire?
was gonna say, in my head it kind of worked like an insight check too. Like, how do you even know if a character is lying, for example, right? And it's more like noticing like the small cues that are based in your experiences and depending on obviously on your stats and stuff, right? But that's why you fail martial checks as well. Like sometimes you just don't get it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, for
Aw.
instance,
And we for sure fail quite so quite a lot of them.
the
Sometimes
kindred
it's just kind of
spirits.
dumb.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
think the implementation of martial checks itself is just, I think it's a very good idea. Not in the sense that not just in the sense that it like improves the quality of combat, but also in the sense that it improves, well, combat in terms of like turns, but I think it improves combat also in terms of the enemies that we face themselves, because that means that the enemies that we face aren't just, CR3 Basilisk, it has these abilities. Like, it's not just that, it's something that is above and beyond it. It has unique traits that we have to like look out for, unique attacks that we should be wary of, and I think that in itself just shows that the level of enemies that we're going to be facing aren't just your normal fire newt. So yeah.
They're not just stacks of hit points, right? That you are like hitting and striking down. I remember the first fight for Kin and Dread was a fight against these bandits, right? And so bandits in the normal book is just this like CR 1/2 guy that either shoots a bow or slashes you, right? And so martial checks not only gave me a way to show you, like, add more complexity to the fight, but also like show it to you and such that it didn't feel as complex, but also like have like role play things inside their abilities, right? For instance, one of the head figures in that fight was like the bandit captain guy had like cleric like abilities, and his abilities were named so that you could see like, okay, what happened with him that he like, one of his abilities was like faithless. Boom, it gives you something to pull on more just so then combat stats as in hit points, like, oh, something's going on with this dude.
I'm kind of torn on that because I see it as a strength and weakness because it's really, really cool to play as a player. To have every enemy you go against has like this kind of a whole list of skills, or they have a backstory or something that you're getting from this. But I think it kind of turns off people on the DM level. Like, every single combat you make, you have to make a special character with special abilities. And Ash at least has made some pretty complex fights that really have like 3 or 4 different special abilities plus like their attacks, and then after like half their HP is gone, it changes to something else. Like, I don't want to make a campaign that has that many deep, difficult bosses. I don't really want to spend the time on that. So it can be a little bit of a like scary thing for people who don't want to put in the energy as DM, I think.
Yeah, I think I do agree. Like, you don't necessarily have to, but the implementation of martial checks just kind of, I feel like if any of us like as DMs or potential DMs like implement martial checks at some point, I think it does mean that we may or may not be ready to implement more special characteristics, special like boss type enemies.
It definitely does put more weight on the DM. I will agree. I have a lot of fun with it, and so I enjoy it, but I definitely don't recommend it for just everyone to do.
In my campaign, I do use them, but my general random encounter, I don't do any specific things. So, like, you can use your martial check, and you can get, like, their general weaknesses and, like, figure out their basic attack and, like, their HP. But it's not going to be that useful. Though I do use them in a specific way with bosses that ties into my other homebrew, which is why I end up using them in the first place.
Transition? And what is this special homebrew?
We're done about my show checks. I do want to talk today. So yeah, my biggest issue with combat was the action, like taking your action can be too repetitive. So I really wanted to come up with a system that gave you other actions that you can take other than the attack action. So even if you're positioned well, even if there's nothing really that you want to do for like movement or anything like that, you can still do something that is not attacking that also has a large impact on like hurting the boss or the the monster that you're fighting. And so I made up what's called a resilience system. And the idea is all enemies in combat start off resistant to all types of damage. So from the very beginning, if you attack this guy, you're only ever doing half damage. And then using this system, you can eventually... I actually finally made proper rules, because I've been kind of tweaking them and changing them drastically over the last few sessions. But I'm thinking of making it 2 steps. You can... On the first step, if you break the resilience once, you then have damage as normal, like you would normally expect in D&D. And then if you break resilience a second time, you then double all of the incoming damage to that monster. And so if you do good resilience attacks, over time, you'll basically break their resilience, have them take double damage, and then the fight itself will go much faster. And then if you just attack like normal D&D, you're always doing half damage, and the fight will just drag on much longer. So you can still fight as normal, or you can try out the new system. Resilience attacks, this is the last little information, are basically any attack that you can come up with that does not do damage, but will hinder the creature that you're attacking. So there, I do have a bunch of items that I'm giving them. One of them that they've already found is a freeze ray. So if you do something to make the creature like wet or like cover them with water and then shoot them with the freeze ray, they will freeze into ice and the resilience will get broken a level. And you can also just do your own things. I've had them like try to use fire against ice creatures, which obviously broke their resilience. I had in the last session an artificer throw a transformation potion into a beast's mouth and trick it into transforming into a different beast, which confused it, and it was grappled, and then that broke its resilience. So it just gives people the ability to come up with their own kind of crazy movement or idea that would hinder a creature and use that instead of a normal attack, while still also helping the fight. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I've been using that for like 4 sessions now. Once again, I didn't have a really good idea of the rules, so it's been kind of going back and forth on what, like, on the different levels and stuff. But Ash has been seeing it for a while now.
Yeah.
How do you like it so far, Ash?
Well, I'll definitely want to give my opinions about it, but I also want to hear people's first impressions that haven't gotten to play with it yet as well.
Oh, yeah.
What do you guys think?
I think it sounds awesome. Like, I want to see it.
Yeah.
I want to see it in play. Cough, cough, Ash.
I think narratively it also makes a lot of sense, or it at least does make a lot of sense, because armor, like in terms of narratively, if they have like say armor, for example, that armor can be shattered, and that in itself can make your like if that resilience goes down, then the attacks may result in a faster combat because and it would do a lot more damage. So I think yeah, I really like it, and I do want to see it implemented, whether it's in like playing in your game or if it's implemented by somebody else.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you can, for like a boss, you might have like, you have to do this to break resilience. But for like a normal monster, it would just be like anything you can come up with. So it really is like player inspiration based. So I like the idea of like, oh, they have armor, I'll attack the armor. And then of course that would be a great resilience attack.
I've seen it in action for a couple sessions now, and I do like it. It's very interesting. I'm a fan of incentivizing things that make the combat more dynamic. And so we now have characters, right, that will, do creative things, try and break resilience. At the same time, I've noticed little things about it during combat that I'm like, is this broken? Could this get, taken advantage of? For instance, one thing early on, right, was Ripley, the ranger-like character in our game, he just kept shooting the freeze gun, right?
Yeah, I had to nerf it. Yeah, that was... He just only ever used the resilience attack, so it's, I think, a little bit too strong.
Yeah, I think that was a good example of, like, you don't want it to work that way, because now it's like he's only doing that, right? And you want to incentivize him to do different things, like have a choice and not just be now stuck to, okay, I'm the guy that breaks the resilience every turn.
Yeah.
At the other point of the spectrum, I know certain, like me thinking about it from my perspective, okay, so I am playing the cleric in the group, and so I do have like CC spells. And my head goes, okay, I'm CCing them, but does this also break resilience because it's, confusing them or like doing something to them? And that's one of the power gaming aspects comes in of like, okay, characters try to get benefits in addition to breaking thing now. And so like any CC aspects, if you let those break resilience, it buffs all of those on the playing field.
True, yeah, and if they're already balanced without that system in place, then it's becoming too strong.
Yeah, or it's just like it incentivizes the player to even more so just use CC, which is already strong.
I in general like the incentivization, but yeah, you don't want to make it too strong. I haven't seen you or anyone use it in game to the point where I think it's overpowered, but I think if you want to experiment with it, please try and test that. Because that would just give me more info on where to draw the line. Because it's possible that I might say, okay, spells cannot be resilience attacks. Or it's possible that, oh no, non-damage spells can be. And don't know where the line is until I've seen them both.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like knowing through experience, like, hey, maybe, like, these sorts of actions can break resilience, but like if they have additional effects, right? How much can you get plus resilience breaking?
I mean, my first experience, the only time I actually played a spellcaster, which is unusual for me, was like Arcane Trickster Rogue, and I remember not liking the non-damage spells because I just didn't think they had enough impact. Like, do other people think they're really strong?
That's a great question. Spellcasters out there, what do you think? These guys.
Like with spellcasting, since you are given so much, like you're not set to bonk, punch. I feel like there's a lot you can like, even when you have as someone who plays a lot of spellcasters, you kind of just like pew pew, or like you switch to like a fire with like extra zap to it. It depends on like what type of spells you take and like how you want to utilize it, and I guess. But like there's a little more variance, but I wouldn't say there'd be enough to make it interesting. And plus, if you don't read up on your spells, especially if you're playing like a wizard or a druid where you have a lot more spells, it takes away from the combat, because you have to read, you have to know like, oh, if I have to do this, you have to keep track of like concentration on top of that. So it might be too much. Like, I understand that maybe martial fighters have too little and then spellcasters have too much, and where would be the middle ground for both of them? That type of deal.
Yeah, and then putting this on top of it can really confuse a new player, most likely.
I myself haven't homebrewed too much with the spellcasting system yet, because damn, it's like already complicated as is, and so like, trying to make it simpler, or just like trying to handle it all can be like hard. But at least when I think of spells, I think of three types of spells. One, damage spells, right? Spells that you take just like, oh shit, okay, I do damage. The next is utility spells that are generally good, right? For instance, Fairy Fire gives your allies advantage to attack the creature. Hold Person keeps the enemy from doing stuff, right? All these spells that don't do damage, but provides battlefield utility, and that like they're great pickups. Then you have spells that are a lot more flavorful, but don't necessarily do anything in combat, or maybe out of combat and very situation specific. I would love for those spells to get, incentive to use, because right now my opinion is some spells aren't actually for the players. They're more so for the DMs to put in the world, just because the player wouldn't necessarily waste a prepared spell on see invisibility, because they literally cannot expect when an invisible enemy will appear.
Yeah.
I think for me, like I've always, like, as somebody who has played a mixture of spellcasters and martial characters, it does for spellcasters, I think is a lot of more there is a tendency to drift towards taking more combat-based spells, because you don't necessarily use utility spells unless they are important, say like the light cantrip, for example. But at the same time, as a DM, I really want these. I feel like narratively, as a player and as a DM, I feel like narratively, using these spells in combat may or may not, like, they should have some sort of effect in the combat. So, like, I do want to implement a sort of this tactic called me being the DM doing whatever the fuck I want. Implementing, like, if somebody uses a utility spell in battle, I still want it to have an effect that they, like, when they cast the spell. I still want it to have an effect in that combat or against the opponent, and I do want to, like, try to implement that someday.
I agree. I think people that use utility spells, though, they think of creative uses for them, and I definitely want to reward that. The problem comes from the spells people usually choose. They're more likely to choose a spell for their spell list if they know the situations they can use them. And certain spells, you just can't predict when a situation would come up that would be useful. And so that's what makes a lot of spells like, why? I don't know when I would use this, even though it kind of sounds cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got a bit off topic, but yes, I do think that's one of the things to keep in mind for resilience, in terms of one thing that seems to be buffed in that system is those CC spells that are already, good to take for people.
Yeah. I'm considering making resilience attacks also split into two levels, like a pure resilience attack and like a kind of like something normal used as a resilience attack would be like a little bit weaker. You'd need to do like 2 or 3 of those. Whereas like an only resilience attack, like using a weapon I gave you for that, would be maybe like only 1 clean hit would break resilience. I think there's enough places that you can like buff or nerf to like make it balance, but I really like the basic idea.
One thing I'm kind of equating resilience to is a system I've tried out in the past, and it's called clashes. And I think resilience could work very similar to clashes, in that the way clashes work is, hey, do you want to do something special in combat? Then let us do almost like a mini cutscene in the combat where it's your intent versus the enemy's intent. Let's say 2 swordsmen, clashing their swords, right? In that moment where time seems to freeze. And whoever wins gets, stuns the other target, gets some special effect, right? For instance, in your system, breaking their resilience. I think the way I would recommend that, though, is the way I do is they're opposed rolls, right? And they're not just you make an attack roll and to do damage or you cast a spell, but no matter what action you take, whether it's an attack or whatnot, it becomes make this check versus that check.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And it becomes more like a dramatic flair.
Yeah. So let's say I cast Hold Person, right? But I'm going to use it to break resilience. I give up the normal effect of the spell. And instead use it as narrative flavor to make a spellcasting ability check versus the other characters maybe like some check of their own, right? That would like face off against that.
I like that. So yeah, if you want the resilience effect, you have to give up something else for that.
Yeah, just like in an attack, you would give up the damage, right? For the spell, you would give up the normal effect and just use a spell for like a flavor. And maybe if you like if we're doing a spell slot system, right? A second level spell slot would give you a bonus to your check.
I have to think a lot about this because numbers are hard for me, but yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it, I think.
You know, I think later I'd love to talk about the clash system with you because I'm realizing now how much it has in common with the resilience system.
It sounds vaguely familiar. I don't know if I've seen it in play, but I think you told me a bit about it before.
Yeah, I've only used it really in my Tomb of Annihilation game because that's higher level, and so I wanted to add more. Yeah, like the classes for me are like real tension-filled incidents because if you win big. If you lose big.
It's just such a like movie moment.
Yeah. I remember one of the instances I used it is like, there's an undead monstrosity fighting you guys, and one of the guys asked, hey, could I cast Remove Curse to mess with the magic animating it? I'm like, we can do a clash roll. If you win, you know, you could literally do something from, you know, stunning the creature or whatnot to even maybe sealing an ability. That's one of the reasons I loved it. You could make it so you change their kit, they cannot use this ability anymore. If you lose, you know, something bad could happen, and at the worst point, it could even lead to death.
I like that. That's another interesting way to add in those like powerful options. I like that one as well because it's not something that you have to do like every turn. So it could be something that can spice up once or twice a combat.
Yeah. It's similar to, like, I think you do have to plan for it as a DM for, like, okay, is there a clash possibility in this fight? Or if there is, what can it do? Like, what can I let it do without breaking the whole combat? But yeah, let's pivot a bit, because I know there's still tons of other combat homebrew topics. Does anyone have anything else they want to discuss within the combat genre?
I haven't thought much about this because it's something that kind of popped into my recently, but one thing that's been bothering me is movement in combat. Because when I play a ranged person, I don't have much of an issue, but the kind of melee character way of going right up to the bad guy and then never being able to leave their side because you don't want attacks of opportunity has been kind of bothering me recently.
I love this topic.
So I'm wondering if, yeah, does anyone have any like cool ideas or like things they've tried with that?
Let me hear it. I know all y'all have played martial character at some point.
My way is to just sit there and be sad and tank things I don't want to tank.
Well, in the last game, having the fight against Kenya with all the AoE effects, where it was either be in the circle and get hit, or be in the circle and not get hit. I think those are a good way to force players to like not keep their character in one tile, even if it means they have to eat a potential attack of opportunity. I also found out that it was a Final Fantasy thing. So I'm gonna expose you right here.
Okay, what do you? It's a general gameplay thing. There's AoEs on the ground. Like, what do you want me to say?
Well, I was telling Alex about it, and he was like, "This is exactly a fight in Final Fantasy."
Yeah, I will say Final Fantasy has given me a lot of inspiration for like mechanics and fights.
But yeah, I think it's nice to have, even if it's not like a effect coming from the boss, it could be like an environmental thing. Like, I don't know, the floor is erupting in lava, and like you just things to force players to move with their characters, and like they have to make that hard decision. And sometimes it's things like, do I move into the zone where I'll get hit, but be able to save my friend, or risk something drastic happening? Things like that.
I think for me, I'm just incentivized to look into like feats or like small things I can like tag on to any martial character that would like let me get a disengage or like teleport short distances. Like
Oh shit, welcome,
I don't know.
Nora.
I'm mostly just like, oh, I just don't want to face this, so let me find something that lets me just like get away from people when I'm in melee range.
Mm.
Welcome, Nora, to the party. To get you a little caught up to what we're talking about right now, is we're talking about movement in combat and how, especially martial characters, right, once they stand next to an enemy, they're highly decentivized from moving away because of attacks of opportunity. But yeah, I can give a bit my take because I've tried different things, and I think I've come to this opinion. If I could, I would do this solution. I would get rid of attacks of opportunity, and instead make it a fighting style / feat that people would have to pick up if they want it themselves. Because I agree that I love it when characters have a reason or are able to move around the battlefield as they wish and not worry too much like positioning for flanking or like moving away and targeting a different enemy. And if everyone has a toxic opportunity, which they do right now, it feels a little bit like, ah, shit, okay, I should just, stay here.
Can you guys hear me now? Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah, hello.
Hello, sorry,
Hello.
my mic wasn't getting recognized. I was just curious if with the feat thing, if you think that it would be like its own separate feat or maybe like tack it on to, because there's stuff like Warcaster and there's a bunch of other, I think there's a handful of other feats where like you can do things on your attack of opportunity. And so would you just like tack that on to those feats where it's like, okay, you can take an attack of opportunity and you can do this thing?
So, yeah, that's actually something I've considered. Like Warcaster, right? You get attacks of opportunity to cast spells, right? You wouldn't be able to do melee stuff with it. Warcaster would just give you the spell reaction. There is Sentinel, which interacts with that, and I am not a fan of Sentinel because attacks of opportunity already make people not want to move. Sentinel feat means like, okay, you're definitely not moving because I will hit you and then you will not even be able to move at all. It reduces the speed of an enemy to 0.
Sentinel's kind of broken.
Yeah. Just get close to everybody and freeze them.
Yeah.
If you're removing attacks of opportunity altogether, then Sentinel could just be dropped to the normal attack of opportunity.
Yes. So here
And it
is
still have the same impact.
There we go.
this is I will post it in Reddit so people can have a look as well. This is my where's VK4 actually? My solution or so to attacks of opportunity, where I take it out and instead make it a feat or a fighting style, and I named it Sentinel.
Ooh.
So I get rid of Sentinel.
Fighting style would also be
Genius.
good. That way it's a little, because I know like some DMs don't like to use feats, or sometimes, like you don't get those till level 4, so. Because fighting style you can take at what level for?
2,
Most
usually.
2.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. But then it's still specialized. Also, because sometimes fighting style feels a little bit useless,
Yeah.
depending on what one you take.
Yeah, a lot of them become like passives, and so it's not as much anything to interact with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if I could, this would be a huge change, and so I've been not sure about using it, but it would be a fighting style or feat that gives you the reaction that make an attack of opportunity or a reaction attack if someone moves out of your reach, attempts to use an object, makes a range attack, stands up from prone. And so it's buffed, but you have to take it yourself using a class feature of some sort.
Yeah, you'd have to lose the other options. I really like that idea.
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, I would like to move around more in combat.
Like, it is really satisfying when you get to use your attack of opportunity, but I think it would be even more satisfying if you took the feat and then you got to use it in that case. And then also that
also
allows
feel
the
like-
the freedom of movement.
Since everyone has one, I feel like you don't actually paradoxically ever get to use it because everyone knows if they move out of range, they get attacked, so no one moves out of range.
Yeah.
Like, if you have the feat, then, like, especially if you want to play the bad guys as, like, properly in character, they wouldn't technically know you have that feat. So they would probably be more willing to move out of range the first time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anytime
Until they find
a
out
bad
they
character or
attack.
an enemy or a player character moves out of range, it's knowing they're at risk of attack opportunity, right?
Yeah.
It's not like, if I move an enemy out of your guys' range, I know he's going to get attack opportunity. It's not like, aha, I got you. No, it's more like, I'm giving you this.
But yeah, now you could roleplay it as, oh, this guy thinks it's safe, and then he's surprised when you actually attack him.
You're trained such that you can look for weaknesses and, split moments like that.
I like it a lot.
But yeah. Nora, since you're joining us now, is there any topic of interest you'd like to talk about? We've talked a bit about things here or there.
Yeah, have you talked at all about the like martial checks and stuff yet?
We did, but
First.
we can definitely retouch on it because we've been transitioning to other things. How did you like the martial check system since you've played with it now?
I thought it was cool. It's kind of nice to be able to like, because so many enemies, especially high level ones, have like all the list of abilities, and it's really nice as a player to be able to get the chance to like in character learn what they are and like what they do, and be able to, it does give that like more strategic feel to the battle.
Yeah, it's like one of the main things I spoke of before is normal D&D combat can kind of feel like you're just hitting a stack of hit points.
Mm-hmm.
And this at least adds a more dynamic feel by like, okay, gather information, react to what you know they can do, right? It
Exactly.
gives you more options because you have more knowledge.
I also really like that, if I'm remembering right, we also had, like, once we discovered all of them, we had the ability to disable certain abilities, like if we rolled.
Yes, that is more
really
recent. Because martial checks I've been using for a while, but exploit checks, that was the first time I tried it out, actually, the no quarter fight. Where now I want to give, like, one thing that feels bad about martial checks, here, weaknesses about it, it feels like a button, you have to press on your turn, right? As well as eventually you run out of it, right? And it doesn't, you're not like, oh, okay, I guess I pressed the button now, what should I do with it? I don't know. Let me get its hit points now, or let me get what, random thing about it. I want to make sure people can be creative still. They can ask any question they want, but now for players that don't want to have to think a huge amount, being like, okay, this ability seems dangerous, let me at least weaken it.
Yeah, because I feel like with martial checks, sometimes there are abilities where once you know about it, there's a lot of like cool stuff you can do to avoid it, but sometimes it's just like, well, this is going to happen no matter what. So I like that it feels more strategic to be like, okay, which one is the most dangerous? What do I need to prioritize taking care of?
I would say on the other side, in the last Kin and Dread fight, I felt like it got to the point where one of the exploits could reduce the damage of an attack, and I kind of felt like I wanted to know and use my martial check to figure out other abilities, but that exploit was so powerful, I felt like I had to take it. So I feel like there's like a balance to be struck there as well. Like sometimes it's a good thing to force them to choose between two options they want, but like if you go too far, then you're just forcing one option.
I mean, if you're at 15 health and the AoE attack that you're in does like 8d6 fire damage, and you're kind of fucked, you kind of just have to use it.
Yeah.
I think a way to get around
that
that.
Really good though.
A way to get around that, although this would make more work for you as a DM, would be diminishing returns. Like each additional time you exploit, there would be less benefit. But I can imagine that would be kind of difficult to balance.
Yeah.
It is interesting because one thing I've actually very liked about exploit checks is, like, as in game design, right? One of the things I want is players to be able to interact with the creatures. That's why I added martial checks. I want you to be able to interact with the abilities and like prepare for them, or like know what they're doing, and so have more choices. But certain ability is not actually interactable, right? Certain abilities like, okay, he will punch me and I will have to make the saving throw. There's nothing I can do about that. Exploit checks at least allowed me to still have abilities like that, but now you can interact with it a different way.
I like the idea a lot, yeah. It's been fun to play with.
Since just about everyone's here, how was the last Kin and Dread combat, like, mechanically?
Everything about it was so good.
Yeah, it was just awesome.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
It
Like
it definitely
roleplay-wise,
had.
mechanics-wise, it felt like we were under actual pressure.
Nice. I'm glad. I was thinking through that fight, and the first instance of Kenya, I think, was a bit overtuned. And so I wanted to make sure Kenya didn't just feel weaker here. But at the same time, I wanted the fight to be simpler and more easily understandable. And so she literally only had 4 abilities. But, you know, with 4 abilities, you can understand a lot more. And I need to make them interact in a way that they're still like, oh shit, the fight feels dynamic. It's changing. There's stuff happening.
I liked that we had to like physically move in reaction to her abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Just most monsters, you like they attack you, but like you don't really respond to whatever they're doing. But here, like we really did have to.
There were a couple of things, if we get a chance, that I was curious about, like people's opinions also.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
The first one is like playing the idea of like playing intelligent enemies who don't just like even smaller like bandits or small like when you're throwing a lot of small things at players, like how you feel about having them like call for reinforcements or run away if people are about to die, like, or if you'd rather just like have everybody like they stick around until the end, or like I don't know, like how you feel about including enemy motivations into fights.
I think that really depends on what kind of enemy you end up making. Like for example, if you're creating like a grunt, for example, of somebody like a bigger boss, they're following orders. They're gonna carry it out to the end, unless they're like, you know, occasional cowards and they kind of run away. But then when you're talking about, say, for instance, like bigger boss fights, like Strange Hot Purple Man, he had a motivation.
He was out running away.
There was an attempt. He actually tried to kill himself before you guys actually got to him.
Oh shit.
But you guys managed to incapacitate him, and everything is all in well. But yeah, point is, I think it really depends on which sort of enemy you end up making, and how it'll fit into the narrative itself. And I think when you kind of think of it in terms of the plot, there's a lot of different characters that you can come up with, even with enemies.
I'm a
That
huge
was
fan.
similar to my first thought too, which was like minor, small, random encounters. I just want them to be cannon fodder. But like a thought out, like higher level encounter, I would like intelligent enemies, I think.
I'm a huge fan of enemy motivation. Like as I've gotten more so to like I want each combat to matter and to have things behind it. And so
Each one.
one of the things I realized, like, motivations are fine, and it's kind of like hard to do unless you plan for it. And like, you know, a lot of DMs do it different ways, or maybe they make a note, okay, this guy will flee at half health, or like they'll try and negotiate, right, instead of going to combat. For me, what's helped me a lot, since we're talking about homebrew, is using a system called encounter traits. And so this is also discoverable by the players when they first make a martial check, in that an enemy might have 1, 2, or even 3 traits that define the encounter in the battle. An example, ruthless is a huge one that I try to emphasize, because I don't want all fights to be, you know, to the death. If the encounter trait I say has ruthless, that means this enemy will like try to kill you if it's like incentivized to. And for me, that's a good way of showing players, hey, life's not on the line for this, right? Or this is like your life's on the line for this, right? I want it to be like an easy way to convey, like, hey, we 2 styles of play technically.
Davey will actually die.
No.
Davy's donkey will die.
Yeah.
No.
Charlie will be eaten.
No.
No.
The other thing I was curious about was for anyone who's used lair actions before, like how you feel about lair actions. And then also like if especially Ash, if you would use like martial checks with lair actions to figure out to be able to like also discern what's going on there.
Lair actions are interesting. I want to hear everyone else's take as well before I talk about them.
I've actually never seen them.
I've never used them. I'm just doing research for the one shot I'm gonna run. I'm being honest.
Hell yeah.
I'm just
That
Can
was
we
gonna
get
cool.
an
Like,
example?
I think I know how they work.
Spoilers.
Hey,
Um,
dragons. Have fun.
I actually used lair actions before.
Mhm.
Wow, that was it's. But I used it like once because I remembered at the end. I was like, "Hey, wait, this dragon has lair action." But I think I don't know. I feel like it could be the fact that it's named lair action is something that I really don't like.
I agree with that. I was gonna actually bring that up, but yes.
Yeah, it's just ugh. But I don't know. I feel it definitely brings a lot more power once you like enter into like a dragon's territory, like a dragon's lair. But at the same time, wow, that's funky music. At the same time, I feel like I don't really understand how it would like. I don't know. I kind of feel iffy about it. It's cool, but it's just narratively kind of iffy, and even like mechanically kind of iffy too. That's what I think.
Like you feel like a lot of times it's not narratively justified. Like why is this happening? Kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I think some of the lair actions are just kind of like you can do the same thing outside of a lair. So why? Like what would be justifying that?
So I myself also don't like the naming of their actions, but I have run something equivalent to them finally. Actually, in the recent Kin and Dread fight, there was what you'd call a lair action, but I renamed it. Kinya had a round trigger, something that triggers at the start of each round, which I like better just because now I can incorporate them in fights that aren't necessarily in the lair, right? It is like because of the nature of the combat, right? This is an effect that goes off on each round and something for the players to know is coming. I think that's the important part of a lair action. You know something's coming at this point, right? React to it accordingly. And Kinya's round trigger was her shade shift. You knew at the top of the round she would summon those clones of herself. And so you would...
You say no, but I forgot most of the time.
Well, yeah, but
Oops.
at least it was there, right?
I should know.
The top of the round, she would summon it up to 4 clones. She would always make sure that there was at least 4 clones on the field before things changed in the fight. And for me, I like just the wording of that better, round trigger, just because now you can add it to other fights. You can think about it in different ways. It doesn't have to be associated with the terrain effect.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be associated with the character you're facing either. It could be either. I can have different things. For instance, I had one combat I ran which had round triggers on the side of the players. The players were defending a city, and so I had a round trigger where their allies that were also fighting gave them some sort of buff or boon.
Definitely like that more. I don't know what it is about the like word lair action that's always I don't really like it either. Especially because like yeah, it'd be nice to be able to use it in other situations. Like if I am running a boss fight and it happens somewhere I'm not expecting, then it kind of takes away my options if I was planning on using lair actions and suddenly I can't.
Yes. I think that's the huge mechanical thing. Because narratively, it makes sense why you don't want to fight a dragon in its home territory.
Yeah, exactly.
But then as a player, you're like, okay, mechanically, I know this dragon is going to have some more stuff if we fight it in its territory. it's cool to interact with it, like, okay, how do I get this dragon out of its lair? But you can assume it might have something like that either way. You don't need to know about lair actions as a mechanic. Like, narratively, it makes sense for your character to want to get the dragon out of its lair. But
Even though, I was gonna say for dragons, for dragons specifically, I do think it's interesting, kind of the trade-off between lair actions and flight, because like, if you get a dragon in its lair, it's not necessarily gonna have room to maneuver, versus if you tackle it outside of its lair, it can fly away and then come kill you. I do think that's an interesting trade-off.
that is fun. I actually do like that myself.
But for other bosses, I feel like you don't have that balance of like lair actions versus flight. Like either you get them or you don't. So it's not the same.
Yeah, I think narratively, you should think of these possibilities of like, okay, what's the advantage or disadvantages of fighting this guy in the lair? But then as soon as you have a system in place that, yeah, there are definitely advantages if you fight him in the lair, right? Players are now going to be, skewed. Kind of on the topic of lair actions, how do people feel about legendary actions?
They can be so annoying.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. It's
Oh my god.
wow, they could be so annoying, but as a DM who like implemented it like a couple times, wow.
You get to
It
just
must-
destroy your players.
Yeah, it must suck to like. I haven't actually faced an enemy. Have I? Maybe, but I don't know. It's annoying. But I think with particular enemies, like for example, dragons, I think it would make sense for some of them to have that sort of like legendary actions. I don't know in terms of the PHB. I don't know up to how many creatures they actually have, like how many creatures actually have legendary actions, but I know that some of them definitely shouldn't have them.
Go for it.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I do think they're annoying, but at the same time, I think that they can add a lot of pressure to a fight that I appreciate for like boss battle purposes, because even if my players are probably going to win, I feel like that risk of like, oh, at any time this dragon could make a wing attack and like knock me prone, that like adds extra stress to the fight that I feel like could be that I like. I don't know.
What about the others, Scout, Meg, Color? Any opinions on legendary actions? Have you guys seen them at all?
I'm not
Quite sure what you mean by that. Like legendary
Yeah.
actions?
Basically, at the end, so certain creatures like dragons have legendary actions. It's basically like a. I guess it's better to say. It's easier to say that it's kind of like a reaction. At the end of any opponent's turn, the creature can use that legendary action right after to do some sort of like attack of some sort. So, say for example, a dragon. At the end of Rue the Rune Knight's turn, the dragon can perform a legendary action to do like a claw attack or something of the sorts. It's basically something like that.
Yeah, and so a lot of like a dragon, for example, I think has 3 legendary actions, and so they can spend 2 to do a wing attack, or they can spend 1 to do, I can't remember, yeah, if it's claw or tail, and then it resets at the beginning of every round. So every single round after your turn, there's a chance it might attack you.
So this is
It doesn't sound fun to fight against. Instinct.
I kind of agree. So here is my analysis on legendary actions. Legendary actions solves the fundamental issue of action economy. When you're fighting a big creature with like 6 characters, right? One creature just has 1 turn, right? It cannot overcome that like differential in action economy easily, right? And so sometimes it just feels like creature goes, everyone else goes, creature goes, right? It doesn't have as much of a dynamic feeling. Legendary action lets you have the creature always be doing something, such that, you know, the players have to kind of react or like do something accordingly, even when it's not the creature's turn. Unfortunately, Legendary Action as it states, it doesn't add any interactability. It's just like, shit, it can do this at any point. I can't really do anything about it, so it doesn't actually give the players anything to interact with. It's just, you know, it's present. My two solutions.
Just give them two, like, I'd rather just have the enemy have 2 spots in initiative.
There we go. That's one of my solutions for it. I have run enemies with multiple initiatives to make up for that, such that you can have some, like, instead of having like, okay, at any point it happens, at least you know something's going to happen here and you can plan for it. Now your players have some interactability. The second thing is now you have a tool as a GM to be like, okay, this turn it has this sets of moves, this turn it has this sets of moves. So even more player like knowledge, okay, I know it can only do this attack on this turn. I can, you know, do something cool and like, you know, make sure I'm not vulnerable to it. I will say for the Kin and Dread crew, the fish that you would have fought was going to be the first creature you fought with 2 initiatives.
Can we not fight him anymore?
We got teleported to the capital. I think it's a little too late for it.
Can we go back?
And yeah.
Isn't the temple destroyed?
Spin-off.
Get spin-off.
Yeah, well, you'll have to. The other solution I've had.
Get used.
I would love to run that fight if, you know, it comes up or what happens. But another solution I had, you guys have seen. I've started using something I've called prep bonus actions, or just prep actions in general. In that my enemy will prepare to do something, right? And using your martial checks, you can know it's going to happen. And so it's kind of like a legendary action, except now you know when it's going to happen and you know what it's going to do, such that players can once again now interact with it. Right? The AoEs were one thing, right? Where you're like, okay, it's going to do this next turn. I can do something about this. Let me get out of it. Or let me move closer to it so I'm not in that donut.
Yeah, that was really fun to play against.
For Nora and Meg, the Trine Watcher, that big sort of undead like creature, one of the things was the lasers that it fired were prep, right? So you knew who was going to get fired. And so you can be like, okay, let's make sure by the time it fires, we're not like lined up.
Oh.
That's my solution, because I do think enemies need to be able to do more than just, you know, go on their turn and then just not do anything for a while.
Right.
What do you guys think about those two ways of thinking? Legendary actions for me, like, I have tried something similar to them, and I did not like not being able to interact with them, because as a player, that means if I can't interact with it, I might as well not think about it.
That's true, yeah. The thing is, I just haven't had enough experience with legendary actions to really know, like, how I feel about it as a DM. I don't think I've used them as a DM. I've encountered them as a player, but on one hand, theoretically, I kind of like the idea of it being a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, that you make a really good point about that. I might as well not care about it, because yeah, like, I don't even like fighting against something with a legendary action. It's like, well, I can't do anything, so I'm just going to keep doing exactly what I would do normally, like with something that doesn't have that ability. So you're taking more damage, but it doesn't really enhance the fight.
I think it only adds to tension to any sort of battle, but besides it, you can't really exploit it in any sort of sense.
Yeah, it's just a balancing tool, just to make the creature, you know, do more.
Yeah. I like that interactability thing, though, because I think there is a fine balance between, okay, are you taking away the player's turns completely by, like, if they have to do something really big to avoid it, But if it's just like, oh, you have to move and sometimes you aren't able to, and so you have to make that choice between like sacrificing your attack or moving, like where you have to make a choice, but it's not too big of a choice. And so there's that little bit of like, you get to kind of do something, but it's not making the fight unnecessarily hard.
Reasonable cost, because if something costs too much or is too worthwhile, then you don't have a choice really. It's just like, I need to do the better thing.
Exactly.
Just going back to the Kenya fight, I really liked having the shades, because not only were they not only did they put pressure like in terms of initiative, and like we really have to think about like how are we going to spend our action, like our one action, to save somebody who might be killed next turn if we don't act now. But also the fact that like the shades put pressure in the sense of the battlefield. Like instead of just like this giant arena, we have one thing to worry about and like, one line of attack. We have like several things to worry about.
Yeah.
Like, lots of opportunity of attacks, which I don't think are a bad thing as a martial player. But yeah.
One thing I really liked that I did with that fight is made a reason for you guys to run around a bit, especially in that one part where I put shades like other places. And so you guys had to be like all scattered and be like
used the dash action. I think the first time in any D&D combat, which was cool. I was like, I actually really cannot do what I want to do without using a dash action. How often does that happen?
Yeah,
Dashed a few times, but with the monk feature, I don't think I would spend an action to dash.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I had action surge, so I did get 2 actions. But
yeah. Like, I think you guys handled that situation very well, because you all be like, okay, I am closer to that one, I could do that, you could do that, we could do this, and then that way we're not all gonna, take a billion damage.
Not gonna die just yet.
Yeah.
Bad.
You all work together to come with a solution to that problem. Here's a topic I'd love to hear your guys' insight on. Conditional effects. We kind of touched base on it a bit earlier when we talked about spells, but how do people feel about the conditions in D&D and the different types of conditions?
Like exhaustion, stuff like that.
Yeah, like exhaustion, poison, petrified, flanked.
I feel like they're really underutilized. I don't know what half of them do.
I do think it gets confusing, and maybe it's a balance thing, so it does make sense, but it does get confusing, like which ones do you roll for at the beginning of your turn, which ones last until the end of their turn, like just some stuff like I feel, because there is such a variety between when you can save from things or how long effects last, and so that can get confusing. But I do think that depends on like how balanced different conditions are.
Yeah.
I think my biggest issue, part of it is that you don't see them very often. So, like, I'm not aware of a lot of them. But a lot of it is just, I think I'd always choose to do damage over inflicting a condition. So, like, I don't personally see them as useful enough to be better than just doing damage. That's a different argument than, like, if the enemy is using it on you. Which obviously would be.
Well,
I don't think I've seen much of that either, so.
Well, I think one of the main things about condition, and one of the reasons you guys haven't seen much for the games I played run for you guys, is because for me there's hard CC and soft CC in terms of conditions. I hate hard CC because I feel like it's fun when something adds a new like battlefield effect or condition or stuff you have to play around or like interact with. Hard CC isn't interactable with. It just means you lose your turn. And once
Right.
again, it becomes a balancing tool. Like, okay, I have to give this creature hard CC in the monster manual so that they can make up for there being 6 people they're fighting.
And I mean, as this, you've brought up many times, like the whole thing we're looking for is like player agency and like interactability. And hard CC basically removes all of that, right?
Yeah.
And it's frustrating to be like, oh, now I just have to watch for an entire round.
Yeah.
I feel like at least if you roll at the start of your turn, there's kind of that like, oh, I could get my whole turn back. And so it feels like it's more up to the dice than just like, well, no matter what happens, you're going to lose your turn.
Yeah, and for balance reasons, right, you do need, like, most of the things to be end of turn effects. Otherwise,
Right.
if a player casts that spell and then gets no value out of it, it feels bad.
Yeah.
But for that reason, I really like soft CC, because what soft CC does, I categorize soft CC as stuff that doesn't remove someone's turn, right? They can still have a turn. It changes factors about it. For instance, being prone is a great example of soft CC, right?
I hate being prone.
It makes you think like, if I'm prone, damn, people have advantage to attack me, I want to stand up, right? It costs half your movement, so it changes, okay, I only have half movement on this turn. Right? It changes, the variables in play when you're trying to decide what to do with your turn.
I think it's a little tough to make it fun to experience when it happens to you.
Mhm.
Like, if I get knocked prone, it's just like, I mean, my first instinct is like, okay, let me just go back and redo that turn so I don't have to be knocked prone. I'd rather skip the attack and not be knocked prone than, like, do damage and have to deal with the condition. Maybe it's just me really not liking having to, like, change up things, but I feel like if it's being used on me, like, I want to have a reason, like, to feel like it should not have been avoided. I don't know if that makes sense. And then I think the opposite is true. It's really fun to use on enemies, but I think it's just a lot of people don't, like, have easy ways to do it, or they just don't see it much, so they aren't really aware that it can be powerful.
What do other people think about conditional effects, either on your character or on, like, inflicting them?
As a martial player, I always wish there was more that I could do to inflict some sort of condition, like any
Mhm.
sort of utility. That's why, as for key, I'm trying to grab the martial adept feature. And then a lot of times I always think, is there a use in me grappling in a situation rather than doing damage?
Grappling is stronger.
Yeah, like as we've been saying for combat, one of the main issues is the lack of actions when it comes to martial characters. Because like a
Mhm.
spellcaster might be able to do things like, I don't know, turn somebody invisible or like set a shroud of darkness in the field.
And they have a lot of
for
choices.
martials, yeah, they have a lot of choices and like potential effects that they can do if they take those spells to begin with, which is another issue. But then for martials, it's just I can bonk. Sometimes I can grapple. But there's the issue of like things with high strength or dex, and then your grapple is not gonna necessarily land. Things like that. So when it comes to applying conditional effects, I really wish there's more of a way to do it in combat, in terms of like the player
Yeah.
side. And getting hit by conditional effects is not that bad in my opinion. Like, yeah, you can. It's like, it's obviously a debuff, but in terms of like how much I'm having fun, it's still gonna be great. It makes you
That's good.
re-evaluate what you're gonna do, which I think is always a good way to keep combat interesting.
I think that's just my personality then. If I have a plan and something foils my plan, I get very frustrated.
It is frustrating, but I think D&D,
But
like,
that can be a good thing, yeah.
yeah, with many things, a little frustration is okay.
It's true, yeah. I would never not have fun in a fight because of it. So maybe I'm overstating my case here.
Yeah.
I think it's a very instinctual thing, right? Just like, oh shit, I got hit with CC, right? Now I have to redo a plan, right? But yeah, at the same time,
Yeah.
I do agree. I do like it as a tool just to add another aspect to the combat. Like, okay, this fight, I'm hit with this condition for this turn. What can I do? Besides, it incentivizes me to do maybe something different or to act in a different way, right?
Like most things, if you're able to do it, like you said, with the prepped actions and stuff, that instantly makes it like a completely different game. Like I would be completely cool with hard CC if it's prepped the turn before. Because then, okay, well if I don't want to lose my turn, I have to use my turn to avoid the hard CC, and that actually is very interesting.
I agree with that. One of the reasons I wanted, like, prep stuff like a telegraphed ability is so, I can have more stuff and stuff that you normally wouldn't want to do to a character because it would feel bad, but hey, you have a chance to solve it.
Yeah, as a slight spoiler for some of the monsters you'll see in my Deep Currents campaign, using the resilience system, I figured I could use a lot more like hard CC and stuff with bosses, where they will actually like stun you or paralyze you or something, and if you break resilience, that effect will go away. So like someone gets hurt in a different way than like getting knocked to 0 HP, and then everyone has to do something to like save them and bring them back. I just think giving that little bit of extra like player command over it makes it a lot more interesting.
All right. We've been talking for a bit, and I would like to talk about one last topic and then definitely keep talking off the thing, but we're getting to a good length. I would love to hear maybe one good homebrew that people have liked, that they've seen used, that they would use themselves, and why, right? Just like what about this just like fit for you?
Specifically combat or anything?
Let's stick with combat, because I definitely want to do more homebrew videos in the future.
I think we already talked about all the ones I've seen.
Huh? It can be something small too, and doesn't have to be like a huge new system like martial checks or an overhaul. It can be also something you're thinking about using yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I will throw one of you under the fire unless we have volunteers.
I mean, this is kind of related to things we said before, but you did something similar in with the prepped effects, but I kind of want to try doing more like countdown things.
Ooh.
Like, this will happen in 3 turns. Unless like you do, and then figure like for my resilience system, I might be like, oh, you have to completely break their resilience, which might be hard to do in 3 turns, or this effect will go off.
Ooh, that's cool. I like that.
So that's something I want to try more.
Ooh, that is fun.
That does sound really fun. I'm kind of thinking there's 2 things, not so much that I've seen, but maybe that I'm interested in incorporating is one, I really like the idea of, Ash, I think you called it round triggers instead of player actions. Because I feel like that could add more, like it's a simpler way to add some fun abilities into a fight. Like, okay, this is what, like stuff that's going on in the background. And the other thing I really want to try incorporating is just more, not like more stuff going on in combat. So either like defending an NPC or defending a structure or like having to accomplish a task in combat. I think I want to try that out more because it just sounds like a fun way to make like give players an alternate goal that they have to work towards. So it's not just like hit the thing until it dies.
I like that.
Yeah,
Additional
we talked
objectives.
about that at one point, and I think because we mentioned how that can be really annoying in video games, but I think with a DM, it can be so much more interesting because you avoid a lot of the pitfalls of like AIs and stuff.
Exactly. Like intelligent NPCs.
Exactly. Like that would be so much more fun than what I've seen in video games.
It's like, please stop running right into the middle of all of the enemies. Like, I don't want you to die.
Yeah, I think we
I
definitely
think
talked
we did.
about this, how like players can now do more than just like have to follow behind in, let's say, an escort mission, right? They can talk to them, see like, hey, this is our strategy. Why don't we try this?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like that. I really like additional objectives in combat, just because
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
you can see people shine in different ways, right? Maybe people that have more like skill check oriented, right, can apply that to this new objective. And it's not all about big damage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna throw it to you, Scout. What's your favorite little thing you would either want to do yourself or have seen used?
I think all martial classes should get martial adept by default. But no, on a more serious note, I do think it could be interesting, like you said, like some sort of fighting style, addition to martial classes. It could be like a small buff, but just something that gives them more options. So that their one action isn't just spent like hitting things. And I know like that's like they're incentivized to like hit things. They get like extra attack and whatever, but I think doing things like, I don't know, intervening to like take a hit for somebody on your team, or like
Yeah.
boosting your teammates' ability to hit something. I think that would be a lot more interesting for a martial class.
More mechanicals or maneuvers built into their kit.
Yes.
Someone who's
like more,
playing a pretty supporty fighter, I would love to see more like support stuff that I could do.
yes. Like more utility, more support, not just
Yeah.
bonk DPS.
I like that. All right. Saf, Meg, either of you here?
Oh,
All right. What's
Yes.
your favorite little homebrew that you want to employ yourself, have thought about, or have seen gone well?
I mean, martial checks have gone pretty darn well. I don't know. I'm still thinking about the one thing that I mentioned before, how with one weapon, especially for martial characters, there's a lot more things that they can do with it. So like similar to For the King, but I do really want to implement that. I think it would bring at least a little bit more options to martial characters, if like even just by a little, it would, like, with one single weapon they don't just have to smack somebody. There can be, like, I don't know, a harder smack. But yeah, I'm thinking maybe I'll try to implement it. We'll see.
Yeah. There's some base stuff like that in the game right now, but it'd be nice to have like something that applies to all characters they can do without having to invest. For instance, sharpshooter, right, is where like now you have a special attack that's less accurate but does more damage.
Mm.
All right, Meg, what about you?
I feel like, I don't know, in North Korea, I love the idea of like doing ability checks on top of combat, but I just felt like the idea was really cool, but I feel like it was really difficult to apply the concept because we're panicking, thinking, oh, we have to fight people, right? But at the same time, we need to pass these ability checks. I liked having like a mixture of like RP and then having those checks, but like I don't know what the middle ground would be. Like maybe do one set of combat and then one set where everyone does checks, or that would be too boring, or like I don't know. I just really like the idea. I don't know how to make it more like fluid, because it feels abrupt when you have to stop fighting to do a check and it takes a whole action.
That's interesting. Because yeah, one
Someone
thing.
wasn't part of that. How did that check stuff work? Sounds interesting.
It was a skill challenge on top of combat, so we had
Like
to.
the action to challenge like the skill challenge instead of fighting.
Yeah.
I'm trying to recall which one was this. Which encounter?
Our
What was
final encounter, probably.
Yeah,
Final
we'll get
encounter,
the
yeah.
Inquisitor.
Oh yes.
I do think we ended up focusing a lot more on combat
Instead of the
yeah.
skill challenge.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll admit that one was pretty clunky itself. It didn't like fit together in my head either. Well, like design wise.
It's a cool idea though. Like you can either fight or you can do this thing that needs to be done during the fight at some point.
Yeah.
I think how I would improve it in the future is give it more like concrete sort of rule set. I think that one was a little less concrete, and so there's a bit more confusion. And if you're committing to a skill check instead of an action that does something in combat, it'd be nice to feel more returns from it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I feel like if we feel like we're not getting anything, and I mean, I do really like the idea because that goes back to like having an alternate goal. I like the idea of like layering those two on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think we'd also failed a lot of skill checks recently in that, and so we're like, if it feels like we're getting nothing back from doing the skill checks, maybe then it's like it feels like there's more incentive to focus on combat. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the hard part about balance.
That's interesting. Yeah, I do want to use it like at some point again, but rework it because I remember my notes not being in the state that I want them to be by the time we got to the challenge. I was like, shit, I should have planned this out better. I think, yeah, I would want better returns, I think is my solution, right? Like once you make a success, it also maybe does something minor in combat, and so you don't feel like you're just building to this goal eventually, and you're getting something out of it still on your turn, right?
Right.
I do like though, speaking of that fight, the idea of using like throwing in enemies that you have the option to fight, but clearly will kick your ass and you should leave. Like the Inquisitor, I think we like barely scratched her, and she was clearly very strong. But I like that she had a very clear goal in mind, and so like I probably would have just kept attacking her with spells as Crag, and he probably would have died, but because like I threw the thing that she wanted to Kamiya, then I was able to like escape that encounter. And so I like that there's kind of like, okay, you have to think about this in a different way.
Yeah, I think that brings us also back to just enemy motivations, right? Because I didn't want this just to be, she's a sack of hit points and she's gonna turn you guys into sacks of hit points, where she does not really care or like see you guys as real threats, even though you guys were, and just is like, going towards this goal, right? Can you stop her from getting this goal instead of just setting her to 0 HP?
It's an easy way to add in more than just stuff, just like learning a little bit of play.
Yeah. I think to close off, there's a lot of combat homebrew that I like, and trying to think of one is hard. My style is I really like simple quality of life changes that just tweak something, and so if it's a nice simple solution that just fits easily, those are my favorites. Just a couple. I would say the one I would love to really implement and get a good basis for, though, would be the clash system I spoke about previously. I did put it on the back burner for a while, but I love, like I said before, the RP in combat, when you can like see a character grow or commit and just like have these spotlight moments. And clash system gives a sort of way for you guys to do this, where you make literally a gamble and a pose check, and you are locked in this scenario where it's going to change, your character's role. But yeah, I really, really was excited for this podcast, this episode, just because Combat Homebrew, is something I've thought about a lot, and not just combat, but homebrew in general, because quality of life is just huge for me, and I love all the different ways people play D&D, and then trying to account for that and find a good way that bridges those gaps. But I did want to thank, this is like a good length for at least the recording, so I want to thank each of you guys for joining me here. I want to definitely have additional homebrew episodes down the line at some point, but thank you guys for giving me your insights. Let's talk more, because I definitely would love to. Anyone have anything in closing they would like to say?
D&D. D&D.
I can not create this anymore. I'm so excited.
We just love D&D here.
Exactly.
Maybe too much.
I do love how everyone's on the same basic idea of just make it fun, make the
Mhm.
players happy.
Hello,
That's all
welcome
we
to
really want
D&D
here.
Addicts Anonymous.
Yeah.
We're back at it again.
D&D
Back
Addicts
at it
Anonymous.
again.
Back at it again. We'll be back at it
The
in the
D&D.
future. Signing off, though. Goddamn, that was fun.
Participating too much. I was listening, but I'm kind of like doing some data
Oh, hell
processing,
no.
so I was like,
Shit was a lot of fun. Next time, I don't know what we do. Pew pew.